All right, awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Quantum Alignment Show. I'm Karen Curry Parker. I'm excited to have you guys here. We have kind of a interesting, juicy, kind of, I don't know, potentially controversial topic to talk about today. So we're going to just keep rolling through the dialogue we've been having. I think we started this at the beginning of July about what is truth and how do you know what's true and what's not true. And I want to get started with the presentation as quickly as I can because I'm hoping that we'll still have time at the end for questions. Cindy, are we still all good? I'm about to put slides up. Hang on.
We are still all good.
Okay.
I see us on Facebook.
Oh, that's awesome. It's going to be a good day, I can tell. All right. Except I can't find the slides. There we go. Okay, awesome. Okay, slides are up, yes. And
slides are up.
And moving?
And moving.
Trifecta. We're live, we're streaming, slides are up, and they're moving. So here we are today exploring what is truth. And I started this conversation with you guys a couple of weeks ago because I don't know if you're having the same experience that I'm having, but you know, when I go anywhere in the world, like social media, Facebook, not so much Instagram, but it's still kind of there a little bit, but Facebook especially, it's like every single post has a different viewpoint and a different perspective on what's going on in the world right now. And kind of sorting through all that can be really challenging, can be, I don't know, hard. It's hard. That's all there is. It's hard. And sometimes trying to figure out what's really going on and trying to figure out where you stand. And I think in conjunction with that, also trying to figure out how do we work together and collaborate and co-create with people who have different perspectives and values than us, because I think that's probably the biggest challenge that's facing us right now at this place in our human journey. So today we're going to talk about control dynamics and what's really going on. Now, when I say what's really going on, please know that I'm not going to stand here and say, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, although I do think you should be wearing masks. I'm not going to tell you what's out, what scientific data is true or not true. And part of why I'm going to not tell you what to do is because there's an irony in human design. And that irony is you have a system, really basically a pedagogy, right? And it's a system that tells you that you're here to follow your own authority. And if you share and teach this system, there's a conundrum in trying to tell people what to believe and how to believe it, because you can't liberate people to find their own inner authority and then tell them what they've discovered is wrong, because that's problematic. So my intention for today is to have a conversation with you about what might be influencing your perception of facts and truths or not truths, denials, whatever you want to call it, and also what might be affecting other people's perceptions of facts and truths and reality, and why it's so important if we're going to do sustainable activism as a part of transforming this world into a world of just, equitable, and sustainable peace. There's some really core essential things we have to each do individually in order for us to assume our role as global change agents. So in the email that I sent out today, I think I talked about, we all have that one relative, right, that wants to be in charge of or control everything. We're going to be talking about control dynamics, not only on a personal level, and I'm definitely going to address it more on the personal level today, but I do want you to take a step back and also think about these dynamics more on a collective level. I want you to contemplate from perhaps a different perspective what all this movement and energy and need to be right and righteousness is that's happening out in the world. it's not what I think is going on, and what I think the source of the problem is might not be what many of us are perceiving as the problem. So let's explore this a little bit. You can't have a controller without a victim. So there is a dual dynamic going on in control and controllee dynamics. And interestingly enough, at the root of both of these behaviors is essentially the same kind of pain. Controllers aren't interested in truth. They're only marginally motivated by outcomes. What they want most of all is the feeling of power that comes from dominating others. And we're going to talk at the end of the show of how all the different ways that we get dominated, because I want you to kind of tune in to, are there some more subtle places where you're having your energy compromised, or are you perhaps engaging in some kind of dominating dynamics because there's some kind of unmet energy need happening for you on the internal plane? Controllers make up facts, or they also make up denials, which can be gaslighting. And this is necessary to keep the other person that they're trying to dominate or control off balance, and it undermines the victim's self-confidence. If the controlling is successful, the victim usually loses their clarity altogether and begins to defer to the controller's opinions. So you kind of get, we joke a lot, we're sci-fi nerds in our house, and we're big fans of Star Trek. And I don't know if you've seen Star Trek, the new generation, where, you know, Captain Picard gets absorbed by the Borg. You know that one, don't you, Cindy?
I know that one.
Cindy is my fellow sci-fi nerd, right? So we have big jokes in our family about you. Oh, don't mind him. He's been absorbed by the Borg, right? So sometimes
assimilated.
Yes, we get assimilated by the Borg. Of course, this dynamic gives the controller a hit of energy and power from the other's attention. Controlling is an obsessive behavior that is an attempt to push away insecurity, and that insecurity shows up in a lot of different ways. So if we're going to explore what creates this dynamic and our individual roles, whether we're being the controller or the controllee, and usually we're doing both, because if you get controlled by someone because it's an energetic suppression, there's a tendency for us to then take that suppression, that feeling of insecurity, that place of disempowerment, and then go do it to someone else. You know, keeping it on a very, real life conversation. How many times have you as parents, I'm going to say this for me personally, I'm not going to presume you do this, but there have been times in my life as a parent where I've had a controlling kind of a dynamic with someone outside of my house or outside of my family. And I'll come home, and nowadays I'm just home because I never not be home, right? I'll turn around and I'll take it out on the kids, right? At the dinner table, I'll snap, or I'll try to overexert control. And of course, kids do that too. Then you take it out on the kids, and if you've got more than one kid, they start taking it out on each other, right? It's like, it's a ball of the need for empowerment. It's like a little fireball that just gets passed on and on and on and on and on. Hurt people, and hurt people also allow themselves to be hurt. And I want to really be mindful when I'm saying allow themselves to be hurt. It's not like you're consciously standing there going, I'm in pain, come on, control me, okay? And even if you're a controller, it's not like you're consciously going, wow, I feel so completely out of control of my whole life, I think I'm going to go control that person over there. It's an unconscious, reactive dynamic. And awareness, and bringing awareness to the underlying driver behind the need to control or the experience of being or feeling controlled, is important. We are vulnerable to control or to being controlled when we feel scared, uncertain, insecure, disempowered, or we have low self-worth. And here's one we don't think about a lot: when we're burned out. And we'll unpack that a little bit. When we're controlling or being controlled, we don't know what truth is because we're reacting. And I wrote reacting in this way very deliberately because we are literally going through the acts of an old story and we're just reacting it. We're reacting out the same story in a different format, sometimes in a different setting, sometimes with somebody who's less powerful than you feel, or sometimes it's with someone who you feel disempowered by, but we're just living out an old pattern and we're reacting. We're not being deliberate in our creative process. So let's explore for a little bit why this dynamic evolves. And we're going to look at this a little bit through the lens of human design. And I really want to invite you as hopefully we get to the end of this and there's time, to think about this and contemplate this in the context of where do you feel powerful in your life personally, and where do you think, or what questions do you have about the power in your own chart? The first place where this dynamic evolves is something I've talked about a lot this year, and I've talked about a lot when I talk about parenting, and actually when I talk about healing. The human design chart shows us, and I'm not going to get into all of it because there's a huge collection of factors in the chart that create specific energy needs. So I'll give you some examples though. An open throat or a non-motorized throat. That means a generator, a projector, a reflector, those three configurations. These are people who need a certain amount of recognition and attention to activate their energy. And if over the course of your life growing up, you never got appropriate recognition and attention, and you felt like you had to, for whatever reason, fight to get attention, do inappropriate things to get attention, or maybe some of you learned to just quietly disappear because you didn't want attention at all, and it was too hard and too painful to try to get it. If you didn't learn how to, in a healthy way, get your energy needs met, your needs for attention and recognition met, you may have cultivated specific behavioral patterns that got you attention. Especially because for kids, a lot of times, and I think this is really true for generators, projectors, and reflectors, negative attention is oftentimes better than no attention at all. There are 4 mistaken motivations that people have when they create mischief in their lives. It's a pattern of behavior that starts first when we're children. And when we're children, we call it misbehavior, right? And really what misbehavior is, because children have a very limited ability to express what's really going on with themselves. They don't know how to articulate things like, hey, mom, I'm feeling a little bit disenfranchised in the power structure of this family. Is there some place where I can get some appropriate power so that I can get my power needs met, right? And power needs are very important. The need for power and learning how to be powerful is so important that we go through 2 distinctly different cycles in our growth as children, both first in our early childhood, like between the ages of 2 and 5, and later on in our adolescence, around the ages of, it varies, but about the age 13 to 16, 17, we go through 2 distinctly very important developmental cycles where we learn how to be powerful. You think about, if those of you who have the privilege of hanging out with toddlers and 2-year-olds, one of the very first words they learn to really use with force and power is the word no, right? And if you ever get into a power struggle with them, they learn very quickly. There's like a couple of things they can control that you can't. That you can't make them eat, you can't make them pee or poop, and you can't make them sleep, right? These are the 3 things they can't do. And later on when they become teenagers, you can't make them do their homework. You can't take their hand and physically make them do their homework. And kids learn, oh, if I act out in these areas, I'm going to win. And it's not about winning, it's that they have a need for power, and this is the only way they can learn to experience it. So misbehavior in children, misbehavior. In adults, I just like to call it mischief, right? Misbehavior is a way of expressing unmet energy needs, and as parents, our role is to help children learn appropriate ways to get these needs met. We talked about this a lot earlier this year in the spring, and if you want to go look over, if you're on Facebook in the videos tab, I did a whole series of healing your inner child by design, and we talked a lot about this, right? What are the energy needs of the different types, and how can you help your children or yourself heal those wounds or learn how to get those needs met appropriately. If people don't learn how to be powerful, they're going to learn inappropriate behavioral patterns as a way of getting inappropriate power. Notice how many times I'm saying the word inappropriate, because I am not saying that if you're a parent of a child, you should let your kid rule the roost and run the show all the time, because that's actually a really good way to raise a child with low self-esteem. Children do need healthy boundaries. Boundaries that bend and flow is necessary, but they need those boundaries and they need limits because it helps define their lovability and it helps them explore their capability in a safe way. But they do need power, and they need appropriate power, and they need developmentally appropriate power. And if you never got this as a child, it may be very difficult for you to know how to feel powerful or empowered in your life. And you may have learned that if you're going to get some power, or you're going to feel empowered, or like you have some kind of control over your reality, you have to dig in and use a control dynamic. This is one of the sources of control dynamics. The second thing that happens is, and this happens more over time, is that when we don't get our energy needs met appropriately, we lose resilience. We're not able to bounce back as much, and when we lose resilience, we lose our ability to respond to situations and challenges from a fundamentally creative place. We can't be deliberate when we drop back into that reactivity. So the human design chart shows you how you process energy, and part of what the chart shows you is that the way in which you process energy helps you feel lovable, helps you feel valuable, helps you feel powerful, helps you trust yourself, helps you understand your emotional response so that you can use your emotions as a source of your creative power, helps you align with your authentic self, helps you know how to work with fears so that you can be courageous and not get stuck and trapped in fear and paralysis. And it gives you a code for how you can feel energetic and vital. And it teaches you how to make the right choices that are right for you. And every one of your charts, each and every one of you, you're going to have a different chart. There's no one-size-fits-all formula for how you can embody these core elements of resilience. But you've got to embody these core elements of resilience if you're going to be able to tap into fundamental creativity, solution-oriented thinking, and to be able to bypass control dynamics. Now, as I say that, I want to really encourage you to not feel like, oh my God, that's like, how am I going to do that, right? When I tell people, you got to love yourself, people are like, really, is there a pill for that? That's not so easy. I get it. I'm not saying that this is something you can click your heels together 3 times and poof, voila, you're powerful, valuable, lovable, self-trusting, emotionally wise, completely authentic, totally courageous, totally filled with vitality, and absolutely on track with every choice you make. That's not going to happen, especially in our third leg profile. It takes time. And why I'm pointing this out to you is because I want to really start a collective dialogue about how important it is to take this time to bring ourselves back up to a resilient place, because it is a core element, an essential element of creating peace in the world. So I'm going to go through these 9 resiliency keys, and I know some of you have seen this before, but I think it's a good review, and certainly a review as we go through it, for you to just, as I go through these keys, for you to contemplate how are these keys impacting you, and where would you rank yourself? Let's say if I'm going through these, if you're going to give yourself a score, 0 being low, 10 being like, got this one handled, where would you rank yourself with these? And if you get a score that you're like, oh, I should be a 10 on this, I want you to really, really be accepting with where you are. No one gets a 10 out of 10 on all 9 of these. In fact, I'll honestly tell you, and Cindy can tell you this too, because this is what we do a lot in the quantum alignment programs and in the master alignment programs. Nobody gets a 10 on these. It's not even a solid target we can move towards. It's an expansive place that we grow into, right, Cindy?
Right, Karen.
Okay, good.
We're expanding into it.
Right, and while I want you to sort of key into where you're at with it, I also don't want you to get too locked into the metric, and I really don't want you to beat yourself up for it, because this is just a place of self-awareness to help you understand what you need to do to grow yourself into a more fuller, more resilient expression of the story you're living in. The 9 resiliency keys are comprised of all of the elements in the human design chart. So if I took the entire human design chart, not just your chart, but if I took the chart as a blueprint for the archetype of humanity, this is, the chart itself contains the story of what it means to be a human being. If I took that whole chart and worded up in a blender, all the types, all the lines, all the profiles, all the centers, all the channels, all the gates, if I put all of that in a blender, I would come out with 9 core essential drivers, 9 core essential motivations that, when they operate in the highest level, create resiliency, allow you to deliberately choose to express the highest potential of your individual chart. So that's really the source of where these resiliency keys come from. In my new book that's coming out, the Quantum Human Design Codex, which should be out hopefully by mid-September, there's a correlation in there between the elements in the chart and which resiliency keys they are associated with. I also have a new set of cards coming out. Same thing, the resiliency keys are associated with the gates in there. So you can start looking at, how does this gate affect this particular resiliency key, or how does this resiliency key affect this particular gate in my own personal chart? That's coming. So the first resiliency key, which, again, no one has a 10 on this. No one. So if you're like, whoa, I'm a 3, that's okay. It's okay. This is not about judging yourself. It's just about getting some awareness about where you might need to shine some light on yourself. Lovability is your ability to be open about giving and receiving love. How open are you to giving and receiving love? Empowerment is the second one. Do you feel like you have control over your life? The third one is courage. Does fear keep you from fulfilling your joy? And do you know how to work with fear so that you can still take the bold, right actions that are your true actions, your truth? Decisiveness. This is the one where we get kind of a hack from human design, right? It's, do you know how to choose what's right for you? This is when you know your type and your authority, your type, your strategy, and your authority. It does give you a little bit of a hack on the decisiveness key. Kind of learn to figure out how you operate in the world. Emotional wisdom. Emotions are designed to be used to cultivate a deliberate frequency of energy that calibrates the magnetic monopole, the heart center, that in the highest expression creates a state of heart coherence and influences what you attract into your life. We are designed to learn how to deliberately harness and maintain and sustain a frequency of emotional energy over time. And when we know how to work with our emotional energy, it influences what we create. If we don't know how to deliberately harness this energy, we end up being reactive. When somebody says something to us or does something to us or tries to control us, or we feel like we're being controlled by someone, this is that place where we blow up sometimes, or we get into a power struggle, right? But an emotional power struggle, not a power struggle. Self-trust is your ability to trust yourself, your own connection to your own intuition. We talked about that last time a little bit when we talked about how to know truth. Self-trust is knowing how to trust yourself and trusting that you know what you know. Vitality is the full embodiment of your life force energy that sustains you and helps you be able to do the things you need to do in your life. Vitality means you're fully embodying the life force that is yours to embody in the way in which you carry yourself from a day-to-day level. Authenticity is fully expressing who you are and feeling like you're safe and it's okay to express who you are out into the world. And last but not least, and again, everyone struggles with this one too, and I think that part of that is because this particular energy is under a tremendous amount of evolutionary pressure right now. We are shifting values and what we consider to be valuable, and because of that, the way in which we're measuring value is changing, and our sense of value consequently is changing, including our personal sense of value, and hopefully we're all beginning to grow into a much more expanded sense of self-worth. Self-worth is your ability to really know your value and to live as if you are precious and valuable, as if you are a cosmic once-in-a-lifetime event, which you are. Control dynamics are often a result of people who are struggling with the resiliency key of empowerment, self-worth, and vitality. It's not limited to, but there's a really nice pattern here. People who tend to feel that they don't have power or they're not empowered in their life, they don't have a sense of control over their life, people who struggle with their value, and people who are burned out often engage in control dynamics for different reasons. So if you are struggling with the resiliency key of empowerment, let's talk about this one for a minute. Empowerment is the feeling like you have control or at least influence over your life. And if you feel like life is happening to you and you're totally out of control of what's happening, you may be struggling with feeling powerful. I would say that on a collective level, that's probably all of us on some level this year. It probably feels to most of us that life is a little crazy and a little bit unpredictable right now. And this seems to just keep going and going and going. Last week, I was going to go spend some quiet time in the Northwoods of Wisconsin with my daughter. And we had a tornado. And we had a massive mouse invasion. We had 22 mice that we ended up exterminating in one day in the house. Then my son was in a hurricane and my parents were in a hurricane, all in 5 days. And this is 2020, right? So we're all kind of feeling this craziness of this 2020. And it's leaving a lot of us feeling like, okay, what's next? I don't know. I'm so out of control of all of this. I can't control my emotional frequency. I can't control my sensitivity. I can't control how I show up. I can't meditate. I just, I think many of us are having days, and if you're feeling this way, it's completely normal, where, if you can get from coffee to wine in the evening, you're doing okay with a nap in between, maybe a couple of naps in between. And that there are just some days right now that are like, okay, I lived. Phew, okay, and that's okay. Empowerment, or the theme of empowerment, is most often associated with these four centers: the will center, the sacral center, the emotional solar plexus, and the root center. These four centers are what are called the motors in the human design chart. All four of these have energy or contain energy for power and doing. I want you to understand, as I'm talking about this from a general perspective through the lens of the human design chart, not your chart specifically. It's not going to matter whether you have this defined or open in your chart. You have the potential either way to live out the high or the low aspect of your definition or your openness. And if you're struggling with any issue related to the will center, the sacral, the solar plexus, and the root center, you might be struggling with the resiliency key of empowerment. If you're struggling with empowerment physically, here are the things that often get impacted by the resiliency key of empowerment. So you might find, if you have issues with your stomach, heart, gallbladder, thymus, ovaries, testes, kidneys, prostate, pancreas, the solar plexus neuron network, which is basically the vagal nerve and the gut, heart, brain connection, the nervous system, or the lungs. These are the parts of the body that are most often associated with challenges with empowerment. Emotionally, if you're struggling with empowerment, you might feel anger, depression, unforgiveness, hopelessness, despair, or bitterness. You might find yourself saying to yourself in some way, shape, or form the phrase, I feel powerless to create what I want in my life. I use power, or I overuse power because I feel powerless, so I try to overpower others. I resist success or abundance or well-being because I'm afraid to be powerful. That's a big one. Spiritually, if you're struggling with the resiliency key of empowerment, you might feel victimized by a reality over which you feel like you have no control. And you might feel fated or even doomed. I'm going to give you, as I go through these three resiliency keys that are most commonly associated with power, I'm going to give you a choice point question, and you should have those in your slide handout. And I know that Cindy has posted the slide handout in the Zoom. She might not be allowed to post them on Facebook yet, but you will get access to them after the call. But there is a choice point question in your slide handouts. I want to encourage you, if you feel like, hey, this is a challenge for me, I'm really struggling with the resiliency key of empowerment, to use this question as a pushing off point for your healing and your contemplation. The question here is, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to feel powerful? I encourage you to either take this question and journal with it, take it on in a meditation with you, contemplate it in your meditation, take it on a walking meditation with you, write it down on a 3x5 card and read it to yourself at night before you go to sleep, and see what you dream on or see what awarenesses you wake up in the morning with. These questions are really powerful questions that actually, through questioning, allow you to tap into your spiritual support, allow you to tap into answers out of the quantum field that then materialize for you, and allow you to sort of open up your thinking to access the answer in a different way than trying to sit around and figure it out. So the question for this resiliency key again is, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to feel powerful. The second resiliency key is self-worth. Do you know your value? And we talked a lot about this again earlier this year when we explored the idea of integrity and trauma in the chart. When you question your value or you don't know your worth, you run the risk of depleting yourself in many, many different ways. You deplete your energy, you deplete your resources, you deplete so many things. And when we're depleted, we can't stand in our value. We can't do the things we need to do to protect ourselves, like set a good boundary. Again, I'm going to go back to parenting. And this is just the truth about parenting sometimes. How many times have you had the experience, those of you who are a parent, where you've just been too tired to set a good boundary? You know you need to tell your kid, hey, don't do that. Hey, don't do that, right? And you might even say it, hey, don't do that. But you don't actually get up and enforce the limit sometimes because you're too tired. That's normal, by the way, if you have that experience. That's normal, especially if you've been like in isolation with your kid for 5 months and you haven't been on a date, or haven't gone out to a movie, or you haven't had an opportunity to have some alone time. It's all normal. Be nice to yourself and be gentle with yourself in your assessment. But sometimes when our self-worth is low, we fail to stand in our value. We fail to protect ourselves. We fail to claim and defend our identity and who we are in the world. And when we do that, we start to feel disempowered, and then we start to take it out on others. So self-worth is located in the will center. The will center is the center that is closely associated with self-worth, because this is the place where we define value, both on the material plane and internally. If you have a will center that is defined, oftentimes what I find is the self-worth issue is about, who am I to show up? Who am I? People are going to think I'm in my ego. And we deny our unique role that comes from having a defined will center. Most of us have the center open, and when we have the center open, we really question our value. It's subtle, but it's different. We question our value, and we try to prove our value by overdoing. In both cases, we don't value ourselves and take care of ourselves and nurture ourselves and create for ourselves the resources and the resourcing necessary for us to be fully activated and to be able to fully stand in not only our value, but our power. Physically, self-worth impacts the stomach, the heart, and the cardiovascular system, the gallbladder, and the thymus, which, by the way, is very closely associated with your immune response. So when your thymus isn't functioning well, your immune response or your autoimmune response both can get inflamed or underreactive or overreactive. Emotionally, if you are struggling with self-worth, you might feel unworthy, undervalued, or feel a need to prove your value and your worth. You might find yourself saying in your head in some way, shape, or form, I don't deserve to be ... fill in the blank. Spiritually, if you are struggling with self-worth, you might feel like your efforts determine your value, so you measure yourself based on how much effort you've exerted. Your value comes from the material plane. I'm only valuable if I have money, right? My wealth is determined by the blessings of spirit. Spirit is capricious. You always have a backup plan for God. And if you don't have money, or you're not working hard, or you're not able to work hard, or maybe you lost your job, or maybe you can't make money, or maybe what you love to do isn't as profitable as what your neighbor does. Maybe the metrics that you are using for your success and your value don't add up. And if that's true, then we got to work on the self-worth piece. The choice point question for self-worth is what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to fully express my value. Last but certainly not least of the resiliency keys, vitality. Vitality is that embodiment of life force energy, right? When we are struggling with vitality, we are burned out. We don't have any energy to bring to the plate, to the table. We have energy to bring to our lives, right? And when we can't take action because we're too tired, first of all, there's a whole domino effect of then not taking care of your self-worth, right? And then all of a sudden, you're making other choices that are not bringing you into alignment with your authentic self. Suddenly you're not powerful, or maybe you're overcompensating for feeling powerless because now your body's not cooperating. The other thing that happens with vitality is when we feel burned out, there's a tendency for us to project onto other people that they should be helping us, right? They should be doing for us. But we oftentimes fail to ask for that assistance because we don't value ourselves enough and we don't think we're worthy, right? Or we project onto others that they should be giving something to us that we really should be sourcing from within ourselves. It's difficult sometimes when we're really, really tired to have power and to do what we need to do to stand in our power. And so we get vulnerable to control dynamics. Isn't it always interesting? My dad has a statement about this, and I don't remember what it was. I've been trying to remember it all day, and I didn't get a chance to call him today yet. But it's something about if you want something done, give it to the busiest person, right? It's usually the projector, first of all, because they're like not knowing when enough is enough. And secondly, it's usually the person that has gotten into a control dynamic of doing for everybody else, right? So you give them something else to do because you're too tired to do it yourself. And if you are the other side of the control dynamic, maybe you're trying to prove your value by how much you do. It's not necessarily a vitality issue, but a self-worth issue in that case. So vitality is most often associated with the root center. Are you under pressure, or are you waiting for that root pulse if it's defined? With the sacral, are you not responding if you have a defined sacral? Are you not knowing when enough is enough if you have an open sacral? With the will center, if you're pushing too hard, not taking care of yourself, not valuing yourself. If you're not using your throat center correctly, if you're not creating the world in the way that's right and aligned for your type. I might also add to this, I think it's totally okay to add the solar plexus to this too. I think you can emotionally burn yourself out, especially I think in this last year with just this constant emotional roller coaster that many of us have been on. I think a lot of people are emotionally burned out. I don't want to have any more feelings. I'm done with it, right? Physically, if you're struggling with vitality, it may impact the thyroid and the parathyroid, causing your entire endocrine system to crash, including your adrenals, stomach, heart, gallbladder, thymus, ovaries, testes, and, as I said, adrenal glands. Emotionally, if you're struggling with vitality, you might feel burnout, despair, overwhelmed, despondent. You might feel like, oh, I just can't do it anymore. Spiritually, you might not trust God, and you might feel unsupported by spirit. Our choice point question here is what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to feel vital in my body. Now, before we go on and talk about the dynamics control for a minute, I just want to say something because I know that when we unpack all of these, sometimes it makes you feel, if you're listening, kind of like, well, I scored low on all of this. I can't, I'm going to have to play with these questions. I don't know if that's going to help. I don't want to leave you feeling like, well, I'm suck at this. I'm probably a victim of a control dynamic all the time. You can move through these resiliency keys. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. I want to just lovingly and gently point you to the quantum alignment system and to our master alignment programs. Many of you, I'm sure, are in our current master alignment program. We do offer once a quarter on a sliding scale. So there's nobody gets left out of this. If you feel like you need to be in these programs, they're available to you. We're on the tail end of one right now, but we have a new one that'll be starting at the beginning of October. These programs go through all of the resiliency keys and they integrate energy psychology, the emotional freedom technique, subtle body therapies, coaching, and human design in such a way that you get a very targeted way, a very targeted process that helps you start hacking away at any of the conditioning that you might have that's keeping you from stepping into your vitality or your value or your power or anything else, your lovability, your self-trust, your emotional wisdom. So certainly I would say if you want a really good, documented, scientifically proven method that's going to help you start to tackle these things, check out the Quantum Alignment System, quantumalignmentsystem.com. There are practitioners there who are amazing, who you can work with privately. And if you want to work in the group settings in our Master Alignment programs, we'll have another one starting in October, and they're incredibly powerful programs. And we just have an army of loving practitioners that work to really support you in this. Anytime you start to catch yourself in these old stories, these old dynamics, one of the other most powerful things that you can do is literally just stop yourself in that dynamic and go remove yourself and go write a different story. Literally go write a different story, like a creative writing assignment around what's happening and how you're perceiving yourself in the moment. We underestimate how powerful language is. We know now from science that language can actually program DNA. That language actually has we can actually use language and the frequencies of the cadence of language to splice DNA. It literally can function like a laser. We know that language, when we use high frequency, high quality language, meaning we tell good stories about who we are, literally just as simple as telling a story. There's no you don't have to read some kind of 12th level ascension dynamic. You don't have to use some kind of crystalline technology. All you got to do is use your words, the words of your mouth and your mind, translate divine spark, and ultimately have the power to tell the true story about who you really are. You can use the power of your words to just write a different story. So it might look something like, maybe you're engaged in a power dynamic with a relative and you're feeling really overpowered and annoyed with the control dynamics, right? And you're sitting and you're stewing. I don't know if you guys stew, but I stew, right? You're sitting and you're like stewing. Why does that person always do that? Why am I always stuck in this dynamic? Why does she always, and you're in that and you're feeling, and then you start to get into, I feel so dumb. Why can't I ask for what I want? Why can't I get what I want? That whole blah, blah, blah that we all do. Take that story, go get, here, a bunch of pens, go get a notebook, this is mine, and rewrite that story the way you want it to show up in your life. Literally write it the way you want it to show up. And when you do that, you begin the process of creating a structure. Language creates a template, a structure. It begins to draw into your life things that match that new story. It doesn't mean you don't have to also do some of the deconditioning work and get in there and shift around some of those old belief systems, but it's a great place to start. It's a great place to initiate manifesting something different in your reality. So become a master storyteller, because it's an incredibly healing thing to give yourself and to do for yourself. And certainly I would say the human design chart shows us, we're like at the second creative quarter of the human design year. The human design year is split into 4 quarters. We're in the last week of the second quarter. The second quarter, the entire thing we do for the entire second quarter is we rewrite language. We use the power of language to build a structure for what we're going to manifest. Your words are important, and it's really our language and our words that set us apart as living beings that are very different than other living beings. We are the only living beings on the planet that have the ability to translate divine inspiration into language. And if you're using that translation to tell a story that's not true about who you are, start first with the translation and then get yourself into a master alignment program. All right. Just checking, Cindy, that the slides are showing up again.
They're showing up.
Okay, the dynamics of control. All right, we're going to review for just a minute what we've talked about earlier this year. Where does integrity live in the human design chart? Integrity is in the will center, the place where we have our sense of value and a big source of power in our chart. The gate 26, the gate of integrity, is associated with the thymus gland, meaning if you get out of integrity, it impacts your immune system and your immune response. There are 5 kinds of integrity in the human design chart, meaning if you are out of alignment with yourself, if you're not feeling powerful, because being powerful is a part of the true story of who you are designed to be powerful, you might experience breaches in integrity in these 5 key areas. You might have a physical breach of integrity, meaning your immune system won't work and your body will let you know that, hey, this isn't working for me. You might have a breach in resource integrity, meaning it actually can impact your finances, your material wealth, your information, your knowledge, what you have. It can impact your identity, meaning if you have any kind of a breach in integrity, you might feel like you can't be who you are in the world and you have to compromise who you are or how you show up for your life. That's devaluing yourself, by the way. You might feel like, oh, you might have to choose amoral or immoral actions. You might feel like, oh, I can't do the right thing because it puts me at too much risk. I can't be transparent. I can't own that I made a mistake. Or maybe I have to use this sort of subtle manipulative way of getting what I want because I don't think I'm valuable enough to just get what I want because I exist. And the last one, you might feel like you have to compromise your energetic integrity. You might have to force yourself to show up with energy you don't have for something that you committed to or something that you need to do because you think it's going to prove your value to someone else. Any of these breaches in integrity can lead to exhaustion and burnout, can lead to feeling disempowered, and can lead to low self-worth. We control with the gate 21. The gate 21 in quantum human design is called the gate of self-regulation. If you have this defined, it does mean that the theme of control is part of your soul and your life curriculum. You're here to learn about control. That doesn't necessarily mean you are controlling or that you are a control freak. It means that the theme of control is a big part of what you're here to learn and master in this lifetime. If you are out of integrity with your value, if you feel disempowered, or if you are struggling with burnout, you might experience the need to control or be controlled, or you might have the experience of controlling or being controlled in one of these 5 core areas. Physical control, resource control, meaning you might try to control somebody physically, or you might feel physically controlled. Resource controlled, meaning you might want to control resources, money, etc., or you might feel like your money, etc., is being controlled. You might want to control somebody else's identity. Oh, you can't do that, or we don't do that, right? Or you might feel like your identity is being controlled by someone else. You might feel like you're being morally controlled. Maybe you're being forced to follow somebody else's code of ethics or lack of code of ethics, or you're being victimized by somebody else's lack of code of ethics or morals. Or you might feel energetic control. Somebody's forcing you to do something you don't want to do, or something you don't have the energy to do, or something you don't feel like you can resist. Or you might feel like your energy is being controlled by somebody else. Or you might feel like you have to control other people's energies because you're too tired to find your own, right? I'm going to give you a summary of everything we've talked about because I want to give us a big picture perspective before I jump to questions. Number 1. You can't know what's true if you're struggling with your self-worth, vitality, and sense of empowerment because you're going to be reactive in your perception of the world and you're going to be reacting from your trauma. Number 2, to heal control dynamics, we have to start first with ourselves. The more you heal yourself, the more you don't need to be in a control dynamic because you will be strong in your own sense of value and feel secure. I like to define trauma as any event, experience, circumstance, or perception that causes you to doubt your value, your lovability, and to lose your connection with your right place in the world. When we experience trauma, it causes us to lose our sense of value. It causes us to feel disempowered, and it causes us ultimately to burn out. I have to jump ahead on this one. I'm going to do a shameless plug here for just a minute. This is what I've been doing my research on for the last few years. I can't finish my research right now because of COVID, but I do have a TED Talk coming up It's going to be on September the 19th. This is going to be the very first TEDx event that will be online. So we have an online TEDx event, and I'm going to be talking about the relationship between unresolved trauma, the importance of redefining trauma, and burnout, and how those three elements play together to create kind of a picture of burnout and trauma that's way bigger than I think we realize, and has having a much greater impact than I think we realize. Okay, shameless plug. If you want to go and get tickets, TEDxCOS, which stands for ColoradoSprings.com. Okay, shameless plug over. Number 3, healed people. Heal people. So hurt people, healed people, heal people. And this is important because this is a very, very preliminary research that I've been working on and have had the privilege of being a witness to, is probably the best way of saying it. One of my students has been researching DNA and the way DNA actually emits frequencies that influences the behavior of water. And that the frequency of DNA extends beyond the cells, and that it actually extends beyond the body. And so when you heal yourself, you know that words, good high frequency words, actually can up level gene regulation. You change the quality of frequency of energy your genes can hold. Your gene frequency, the frequency of energy you occupy and you hold, influences the health and the well-being of the matrix that your entire body is built out of, water. Not only that, it's actually a frequency of energy that you radiate out into the world. And we know from physics that higher frequencies of energy entrain lower frequencies of energies, meaning when you do the work to heal yourself, elevate your frequency of energy, use language and tell good stories and heal your sense of empowerment, your sense of self-worth, heal your vitality. When you do that work, not only do you heal yourself, you actually heal other people. Healed people heal people. Hurt people hurt people. Healed people heal people. We have an obligation, I believe. This is the very first step. It's not the only step, but it is the very first step that we have to take if we're going to become global change agents. So we've got to heal our own trauma. We've got to heal our own trauma to protect ourselves from being in control dynamics, and to realize that when we're aligned with our power, our vitality, our authentic self, our value, and we can tap into our inner authority without reacting, we know what's true and what's not, and we can heal the world. I want to just quickly say the registration for our very first Human Design Conference is open. I'm not going to tell a whole bunch about it. Just go there, humandesignstore.com. If you want to share your products and services, we actually are building an online mall. Go there too, humandesignstore.com, learn about that. I want to get out of here in these slides because I know there's a lot of questions. I've seen them popping up in Zoom. And I purposely left 8 minutes for questions, Cindy. Da-da-da.
I'm so impressed.
I did.
So I was posting so one of the questions, the questions on Facebook, Dee in Facebook asks, would love to know where this came from. Language can change DNA. Is it PETA? Or is it unpublished yet, soon to be published?
It's published. I don't know for sure if it's peer reviewed. I don't think it's peer reviewed. This is coming out of a series of research studies in Russia, and it's a book that I have. It's actually it's either a series of Russian research studies where they took cadence of language, they translated the cadence into radio frequency waves, and they were able to use the radio frequency waves to actually cut and splice DNA. I have it in German. I don't have it in English. I haven't seen it. I've seen summaries of the studies in English, but I haven't seen the studies.
There's been a couple. I mean, I think I translated part of it when it was on a Google page.
Yeah, but it's not the original work. It's
not the original work.
Yeah. So that's where that's coming from.
Just looking. So we had a couple people on Facebook that said when we were going through like power, or like Lisa on Facebook says, I feel it's hopeless. And Nason says, I have a prime breach in integrity. So that's where rewriting, I mean, even if you don't do the tapping or rewriting your story, and Philip Allen also says that, but rewriting your story, and you've done this in the quantum leadership activation, it doesn't mean it has to be in words, correct? I mean, part of really getting out of your head was, I've heard you recommend this, doing the glitter, use glitter pens, or put your story in a drawing, or
So part of what happens, in addition to finding language or just in some way metaphorically reframing that story, is when we start to use storytelling as a healing tool, what it does is it gets us out of our left brain. The left brain is all about patterns, logical circuitry in human design. It's all about patterns. So when we get locked into a story that keeps us small, we're oftentimes trapping ourselves in a pattern that keeps us small. And we're duplicating and repeating that pattern over and over again because the brain is incredibly efficient. The brain is designed to be very patterned. So when we have trauma, we get stuck in trauma patterns. When we move over to the right side of the brain, we actually are creating a counterpart, first of all, to the left side of the brain. And what we know about bilateral symmetry is that if you do something on one side of the brain that's different, or one side of the body that's different, you actually can start clearing what's going on the other side of the body. So for example, if you have a hurt shoulder and you have a well shoulder, if you start focusing your energy on the well shoulder, because of bilateral symmetry, it actually can impact positively the well-being of the left shoulder. Same is true for the brain. If you get stuck in a pattern in the left side of the brain, you can move over to the right side of the brain, because there's bilateral symmetry in the brain, and start clearing the pattern by using storytelling. First of all, what happens is it drops us into a more primal state. We're actually, in our early childhood, we learn about the world and the values and who we are in the world from storytelling. If you think about childhood and how much we transmit or how much we learn from story or we transmit to small children, it's all done in storytelling format. So it accesses a more primal, innocent part of the brain. The second thing that it does is it disrupts patterns. You start telling a different story, it starts to disrupt a pattern. I am certainly not saying that is the only thing to do. And I am certainly not saying that, hey, just sit down and write a story, whoop, you're healed. Sometimes people have trauma that is so significant. Or sometimes your response to trauma is so significant. And I really want to make sure I'm clarifying that, because I think that our definition of trauma is so limiting that there are a lot of people out here who are traumatized, and maybe because they're super sensitive, or maybe they're traumatized because they have an epigenetic history, an ancestral lineage of being traumatized, and it doesn't take much to re-trigger that ancient memory. So don't discount your trauma even if you think you don't have something big that's happened to you, and recognize that if you can't consciously move yourself through the trauma, that maybe you do need some extra support, and that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes we need somebody outside of ourselves to reflect the healing and the healing potential of getting out of trauma back to us. And I want to be really clear about that. I am not, these little questions and doing an art project or telling a story, that's not therapy. Master alignment program and working in an integrated approach that uses energy psychology is very, very powerful. It's certainly a good option for some people. And some of you, if you're really, really stuck in a trauma response, I know it's difficult sometimes to find help and to access help, but I want to encourage you to set the intention to really attract into your experience the help that you need. And, it's so important for all of us to really explore, how do we get out of these trauma patterns? How do we release ourselves from these trauma patterns? Because we can't know what's really true. We can't stop reacting if we're stuck in a trauma pattern. D says, can we write new stories on with the? Do they have
typing.
to be pen to paper or typing? I think that you can do it with typing. I don't see why not. I think it's not so much how you do it as much, because it's still a physical act. I think it's really the words you're using. So
Sharon says on Zoom, I'm wondering how to gently help someone who is really set in a rigid of harmful beliefs. I know folks must help themselves, and this person certainly resists the help. Any ideas? Risking sounding controlling myself. The irony is clear to me.
So this is this is sort of a very vague thing. I mean, obviously, if you've got someone who's doing serious self-harm, if you've got somebody who's in an addictive pattern or they're doing something that's significantly self-harming, you may want to stage an intervention. And that is never an easy thing to do. I have had to do that myself with one of my children at one point. It's very, very difficult to do that. And to do that effectively means you also have to kind of release yourself from attachment to the outcome, because you can't control whether they choose to or not, but you certainly can do those difficult conversations. If they're burning themselves out, I certainly, you're a manifester, Sharon. You can ask them questions. Hey, I have some insights. Is it all right if I share them with you? Or you may even try to do the manifester thing and say, hey, I have some insights. I'm going to share them with you now. Sit down, right? They may or may not listen. And sometimes what helps in a dynamic, and sometimes it's a subtle control dynamic, to sit back and go, well, I know what's going on, right? That knowingness about other people, I mean this gently, can sometimes be a very subtle control dynamic. Sometimes dropping into your own energy and releasing your attachment to it and really seeing them as capable. Really seeing them as capable and watching the language that you use when you speak to them, and make sure you're using capable based language, is huge. Sometimes that subtle shift gets them out of the power dynamic of, I'm not going to stop doing this. I know what I'm doing, right? So
I have 3 more questions that came in on
yes.
Facebook. Do you have time?
Yeah. Do you have time?
I have time.
Okay, cool.
Mary Elizabeth on Facebook says, I found human design 2 years ago. How do I tell my older children I'm sorry for living out of alignment and being codependent when I was a young mother? I'm changing now and becoming a better, but I feel a responsibility to apologize for who I was then, even if I thought I was doing my best. It seems a small gesture to say I'm sorry.
I would say exactly that. I have had the same conversation with my adult children. There are many, many places where I screwed up, and I think we have to be honest with our kids and help them remember that we're just people raising people, and it's not always so easy.
Ronnie on Facebook said, there was a quote about struggling and not knowing truth, but as someone who continues to work on growth, when is truth truth?
Good question. Come back to the Quantum Alignment Show next time, the next time I host it, and we're going to talk about how do you know truth. Here's what I would say for you. If it's creating expansion, if it's bringing people together, if it's aligning, or if it feels good, and I mean feels good, not righteous, which is a subtle difference, but an important difference. If it feels good, then it's probably true. If it has a little bit of righteousness or competition in it, if it has a sort of me versus you or a this or that kind of quality to it, it's probably not true. Truth tends to have both and as its theme in the bigger picture. But come back to the Quantum Alignment Show. The next one we're going to talk about finding your inner authority, tapping into your inner authority by design. We're going to get more specifically into your personal charts and looking at how do you really tap into truth and how do you know it.
Okay, and then the last question and this comes up a lot, but Manasai says, I have an undefined throat center, which is my only open center. I have my own business. How do I reconcile waiting to be invited, recognized to speak with courageously sharing my message?
So you don't have to wait to be recognized. You have to wait to respond, Manasi. And I think for you, I would encourage you to respond to the idea of starting with writing your new story. Write a new story that you are bold, and start telling the story that you are bold and you are powerful. And here's a mantra for you. Ready? It's simple and funny. You'll love it. When you're feeling nervous, focus on the service. Okay? When you're feeling nervous, focus on the service.
Now I thought you were going to go with boldly go where no one has gone before. Let's pull in that Star Trek reference.
That's true. We can always wind up with Star Trek, but I like that one because it kind of is when you're feeling nervous, focus on the service. Sometimes, you need the bigger story to call us forward. But I would say for you, Manasi, yeah, You're an incredibly bold woman. You're an incredibly powerful woman. Your throat is your superpower. So start telling a story that you're bold and that you are a champion of truth.
That's it for questions.
All right, you all be well. Take care. I think we have a guest next week, yes? And then I will be back the following week and we'll be talking about authority and how to know if what you know is truth is truth. So take care. Thanks, Cindy. Bye.